cattle roping cowboys, lawless mining towns, American icons such as Wild Bill Hickok, Bat Masterson, and Wyatt Earp. Legendary outlaws, the James Gang, the Daltons, John Wesley Hardin, and Billy the Kid. They're all part of that chapter in American history known as the Wild West. In Outlaws and Gunslingers, the true stories of that special era come alive again. While the Wild West was known for its outlaws, it was the lawmen whom we canonize in American myth. This is the story of the original cadre of Western marshals and sheriffs. He was the hero of the Old West. He was our most enduring and revered icon. He stood for everything that was good and true about Americans. He was the sheriff, the town marshal, the deputy, the U.S. Marshal. Most important of all, the lawman was the purveyor of justice. He was the protector of the common man. He was brave, courageous, and unafraid in battle. He was the one who stood up against evil and prevailed.
Take care of your friend.
The names of the Wild West's lawmen are synonymous with the American spirit. Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Bill Tilghman. These were some of the giants of frontier law. After the Civil War, the settling of the West was driven by a series of boom towns. There were the cattle towns, Wichita, Abilene, and Dodge City, Kansas, towns where the trail ended for the cattle drives. There were the ranching towns, Austin, Texas, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Cimarron, New Mexico. Towns that serviced the needs of cattle ranchers. And then there were the fastest growing and most explosive of all boom towns, the mining towns. Silver City, Idaho, Virginia City, Nevada, Leadville and Cripple Creek, Colorado, and of course, the most famous of them all, Tombstone, Arizona, and Deadwood, South Dakota.
You have people coming in who are there for no good. They're there for the excitement, to gamble, to steal, to rob. You have a predominantly young population, young men. Some women come, but generally those are prostitutes that then are there to make their own money. And the whole town's in an upheaval. Traditionally, these settlements, like the Black Hills, the early gold rush settlements, are prior to law enforcement. Black Hills, of course, was settled prior to any legal authority. The federal government had no authority, nobody had authority, so the miners held sway.
Frontier justice. Frontier justice just as often meant hanging a horse thief from the nearest cottonwood. Damn the trial. Impromptu vigilante committees often ruled the day. Clay Allison, one of the baddest of the gunslingers, formed a vigilante committee and handed out frontier justice.
In 1870, Lucian Maxwell sold his land grant to an investment company whose stockholders were politicians from Santa Fe, known as the Santa Fe Ring, and they were extremely corrupt. And the first thing they did when they acquired the property was they came here and they told everyone living on the land that if they couldn't produce a deed proving that they owned the land they lived on, they either had to pay for it or get off. Well, the people had been living on the land for about 35, 40 years, so to one day be told, hey, you need to pay up or get off, didn't go over very well. And so In order to accomplish their goals, the land grant company hired what were called enforcers. Enforcers were basically hired guns. Some of them were actual outlaws. Their job was to harass, intimidate, coerce, do whatever necessary to get what they considered to be squatters to pay up or get off the land. Well, on the side of the squatters was a man by the name of Franklin Tolby. He was actually the Methodist minister in town. Everybody referred to him as Reverend Tolby. And he believed that the land belonged to the people living on it and actually wanted part of that land grant set aside as a reservation for the Ute and the Hickory Apache Indians. Well, one day, Reverend Tolby was returning to Cimarron from Elizabethtown, which is a mining town about 35 miles up the canyon, when he never arrived in Cimarron. They went to look for him. They found his body in Cimarron Canyon. He'd been shot twice through the back. They found his horse, his saddle, all his belongings. So robbery wasn't the motive for the murder. And as they began to question people in town, they came across a man by the name of Cruz Vega. Now, ironically enough, Cruz Vega had been hired that day, and that day only, to carry the mail from Cimarron to Elizabethtown. So it would have put him in the canyon right about the same time that Reverend Tolby was assassinated. Well, Clay Allison thought that was just a tad bit too coincidental. So that night, he and some of his cowboy friends got a hold of Cruz Vega, took him to the Ponyo Canyon, and there they questioned him. There, Cruz Vega said that he did not commit the murder, but that he knew who did. He said a man by the name of Manuel Cardenas had been paid $500 by some residents of Cimarron to kill Reverend Tolby. Well, Clay Allison figured that if he knew that kind of information, somehow he was involved in the plot, and so they threw a rope around his neck, rope over a tree limb, and that was the end of Cruz Vega.
On the other hand, in the formative days of the Old West towns, many killers were set free.
Just about everybody that commits a murder gets off as justifiable homicide or the guy deserved to die.
During the earliest days of the Old West, the first and only authority was often the U.S. military. As a result of the ongoing Indian Wars, the U.S. Army always had a presence somewhere near the frontier towns. Near Dodge City, Kansas, was Fort Dodge. Near Cimarron, New Mexico, it was Fort Union. Deadwood had Fort Meade in the Black Hills. Fort Stanton was near Lincoln, New Mexico, where Billy the Kid became a legend. The Kid was later killed at the site of old Fort Sumner in New Mexico. However, the Army's involvement in law enforcement ended in 1878 as a result of the Posse Comitatus Act, which ended using the military to enforce federal and state laws. Next in the hierarchy of legal authority was the U.S. Marshal, a political appointment by the U.S. President. Their jurisdictions were often huge, covering entire regions of the country, such as Dakota Territory, Arizona Territory, and West Texas, New Mexico Territory. The marshals and their deputies served all the legal papers of the courts: subpoenas, summonses, writs, warrants, and other processes. They made all the arrests and handled all the prisoners. They also paid out all the money, including fees and expenses of the court clerks, U.S. attorneys, jurors, and witnesses. They rented the courtrooms and jail space and hired the bailiffs, criers, and janitors. During a trial, they made sure the defendants were present, the jurors were available, and the witnesses were on time.
Not guilty.
Some of the West's most legendary U.S. Marshals and deputies were Wild Bill Hickok, Deputy U.S. Marshal at Fort Riley, Kansas from 1867 to 1869. Seth Bullock, the first Marshal of Deadwood, South Dakota. Virgil and Wyatt Earp, who were at the OK Corral in Tombstone. Based out of El Paso, Texas, Dallas Stutenmeyer was involved in one of the most famous gunfights in Old West history, the 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight.
Neighborly, let's shoot him, boys.
Among the most famous of the U.S. Marshals were Bill Tillman, Heck Thomas, and Chris Matson. Known as the Three Guardsmen, they worked for legendary hanging judge Isaac Parker and hunted down the Doolin Gang and cleaned up Oklahoma Indian Territory. They were joined by Bass Reeves, the first black man appointed as a deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi. But the real authority in western boom towns were the county sheriffs or the town marshals. Once a town went through its initial formative period of vigilante justice, businessmen would come in, as they said in the Old West, to mind the miners. They needed law and order to protect their business interests, often saloons and brothels, but also land grant companies, banks, hardware stores, and hotels. This is when the town would turn to that icon of the Old West, the sheriff.
And Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and others came to Dodge City in a period where there was huge cash flow. As buffalo hunters making $100 a day, and that would be around $8,000 a day now. Not bad, you know, by modern standards. No taxes. So gambling, things that naturally occur in boom towns, whether it's based on cattle or based on gold, the same things happen. And protecting that cash flow was a job of the hired gun.
These were men who, by their mere presence and intrepid gunplay, instilled the rule of law. A short-term stabilizing force in the growth of the West, the sheriff was often the leader of a law gang, a group of determined men he could count on in battle. The Earp gang in Tombstone was the most famous. It was often this gang of men that became the deputized corps, the posse that would hunt down felons, murderers, robbers, and cattle thieves. The greatest known posse ever assembled resulted from the shooting of an innocent woman.
The shooting of Dora Hand in 1878 by a young cowboy by the name of James Kennedy. He was from a big ranching family in South Texas, and he had had some problems with Dog Kelly, who owned a saloon at that point, and to take care of the situation or get even, he rode by Dog Kelly's home and fired into the house. Well, Mayor Kelly was out at the Fort Hospital, and Dora Hand was house sitting, and the bullet entered the house and went through the bed up and killed her, ultimately. Well, he, of course, started on the run, and the posse of Charlie Bassett, Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, and Bill Tillman went after him. And they, of course, caught him and brought him back to Dodge City to be tried. Well, in the paper, they said, in describing the posse, as intrepid a posse as ever existed.
Bob Bose Bell is the editor of True West magazine, one of the Bibles of the Wild West. But who was the greatest of the Wild West lawmen?
When I think of the classic Western gunfighter, you have to go with Wild Bill Hickok, because not only was he an excellent shot, actually too good of a shot, he shot his own friend in his last gunfight because he was just too good. His reflexes were too fast. But he looks at, he's got the sash, he's got the long hair, his clothing is perfect, he's got the twin dragoons in his belt, and he is the classic gunfighter in his day and up to today.
If ever there was a life fully lived in the Old West, it was the life lived by Wild Bill Hickok. He tasted everything the West had to offer and died with his boots on in the same year that his close friend and fellow Western hero, George Armstrong Custer, met his fate. That year was 1876, and the nation was celebrating its 100th anniversary. Wild Bill's death was a tragic event in the life of a man who in the end became a tragic figure. It was the price Wild Bill paid for being the best and most famous gunfighter in the Old West. Born in Illinois, young Hickok witnessed his abolitionist family establish an underground railroad station to help black men and women escape the South. Young Hickok personally whisked runaway slaves to freedom. As a teenager, Bill was known as the best shot in northern Illinois. Mary Kopko is director of the Adams Museum in Deadwood, South Dakota. She has been studying Hickok's life.
James Butler Hickok, when he was born in Troy Grove, Illinois, he was the fourth son born to the Hickok family. They did have one other son who had died in infancy. But Hickok was kind of the restless one. He was the youngest of the four boys, and he was very dignified in terms of he was tall. He was over 6 feet tall. He had blonde hair that he wore in varying lengths, but he's most often featured with long hair. He was very handsome, had striking features. In fact, Libby Custer, George Armstrong Custer's wife, was quite smitten with his appearance. So he really had the appearance that by today's standards, he would be considered like a Hollywood star.
At the age of 18, Hickok joined the bloody Kansas conflict on the side of the Free State Militia leader, General Jim Lane. A year later, he had his first experience as a lawman when he became constable in Johnson County, Kansas. Always on the move, at the age of 23, Wild Bill became a wagon master on the Santa Fe Trail. Here Hickok's legend began when he supposedly killed a grizzly bear with his knife and pistol. Injured in the episode, his company sent him to recuperate at Rock Creek Station in Nebraska on the Oregon Trail. Once there, events of injustice led to his first gunfight with the Southern sympathizer Dave McCannels, who was running a scam on the former express station's owner.
The McCannels incident that took place at Rock Creek, Nebraska, occurred in 1861, and it really was the event that propelled Wild Bill into fame. It turned him into a legend. Now, what happened basically is that McCannels was trying to collect money for selling the Rock Creek station, and he came to meet with the stage master, Wellman. And Wellman was really irritated with McCannels, and Wild Bill was there purportedly recovering from perhaps an encounter with a bear. He had been injured. And Hickok came out to diffuse the argument that was taking place between Wellman and McCannels. And to diffuse the incident, Hickok went into the house and said he would get a drink of water for Wellman. And in the meantime, somebody shot and killed McCannels. No one's really sure whether it was Wild Bill Hickok who killed McCannels or if it was Wellman. In the meantime, the two men that were McCannels' friends were coming to his aid, and Hickok shot both of those men to injure them. And then another friend came to Hickok's aid and killed the third gentleman. So there were 3 people killed at the time. No one is quite sure who did all the killing, but by the time Hickok told his story to George Ward Nichols for the Harper's New Monthly magazine, George Ward Nichols really blew it out of proportion and started referring to Hickok as a man killer.
It was a reputation that would haunt him the rest of his life. However, during the Civil War, Hickok was a genuine Union hero.
James Butler Hickok during the Civil War was got the attention of General Sanborn, who was very taken with Hickok's abilities to track down enemies. He was also very good at ferreting out Confederate soldiers. So he really went into the Civil War and through the Civil War, both in the capacity as a spy and also as a wagon master.
And it was during his war days, as he was breaking up a lynch mob, that a woman called out, "Good for you, Wild Bill," giving him the name that would stick with him the rest of his life. After the war, Hickok ended up in Springfield, Missouri, where the most famous and only high-noon one-on-one gunfight of the West took place.
Well, the classic showdown that we see at the beginning of Gunsmoke or many of the movies was pretty rare, okay? But there are exceptions to that. The classic, of course, is Wild Bill Hickok versus Dave Tutt on the square, and he stepped out and they actually had a face shoot up just straight right out of the movies.
Him and a man named Dave Tutt got into a little altercation about, some believe it was about a pocket watch that Wild Bill had and that Dave Tutt took from him over a game of cards. Some believe it was over Jilted Love. I tend to believe it was probably over the timepiece that he had. Dave Tutt went strutting around the streets, and Wild Bill told him, he says, "If I catch you out on the street with that," he says, "I'm gonna kill you." So anyway, they met each other out on the street. They were, some folks say, about 100 paces apart. That was probably exaggerated somewhat. And of course, Dave Tutt pulls his gun out and starts firing at Bill, and Bill stands sideways to him, just calm as he can be. And after Tutt empties his gun out, Wild Bill pulls his .51 Navy revolver out and takes aim and shoots the man right through the heart and kills him. And that was the only actual stand-up gunfight that we, that you see in the movies, things that actually really happened that I know of.
It wasn't so much that Wild Bill was a quick draw. It's that he was smart when he would shoot his pistols, because as he was pulling the pistols out, he would cock them and then bring them up and be able to fire immediately. So many people that are engaged in some kind of gun battle will bring up the gun and then cock it. But Hickok was very quick on cocking the pistol so that he could shoot immediately.
After the gunfight in Springfield, Hickok joined the Plains Indians War and made 2 lifelong friends. He scouted for General Custer's 7th Cavalry, and he joined Buffalo Bill Cody on his campaign against the Dog Soldier Band of the Cheyenne Indians. Now with a gunfighter reputation, Hickok became sheriff of Ellis County, Kansas in 1869. The county's largest town, Hays City, was as wild as any town in the West at that time. Here he killed his first 3 men while wearing a badge. Then in 1871, Hickok became marshal of one of the early cow towns, Abilene, Kansas. In a sense, this was the beginning of the end for Wild Bill.
Wild Bill was involved with the killing of Phil Coe in Abilene. This was a man who was up on a cattle drive and was, for some reason, in the late summer, early fall, he let go with a couple of rounds in downtown Abilene, and of course Wild Bill heard this. He was there to enforce the law, and he came out and confronted Coe about this, and pretty soon things got out of hand. Coe pulled a revolver on Wild Bill, and Wild Bill shot him dead. In the meantime, Wild Bill's deputy came out from one of the saloons, everything, hearing this go on, and Wild Bill just saw a flash of somebody off to the side with a revolver, and he turned and fired, and he actually killed his own deputy. This was pretty much the end of Wild Bill's lawman career, because that really bothered him, you know, that he had killed his own deputy. And of course, after that, he was a wanted man by all the outlaws.
For the rest of his life, Bill Hickok was unable to live the bigger-than-life reputation created for him by the Eastern press. With his stunning 6'3" frame and long curly hair, he could go nowhere without being noticed. For a time, he joined his friend Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. But in the end, Hickok was drawn back to the lawless frontier, where he felt most comfortable. And it was here at the gaming tables that he could satisfy the need that became his Achilles heel: his addiction to gambling. In 1876, the next great part of the lawless frontier was the mining town of Deadwood in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
In the spring of 1876, he married Agnes Lake Thatcher. She had been a patron of Wild Bill's, and again, Wild Bill was really down on his luck. He really wasn't making an income to support his lifestyle, and probably married this woman who was well off. She ran a circus, and then he, after they married in Cheyenne, then he took her back to Cincinnati, Ohio. He told her that he was going to head to the Black Hills to stake a claim and to produce a living. So he heads back west, picks up in Cheyenne his good friend Charlie Utter, and they head to the Black Hills. On the way, they stop at Fort Laramie, and the Army has been pretty fed up with Calamity Jane, who had been drunk for days there, and they asked Charlie Utter and Wild Bill if she could accompany them on the wagon train. They arrived in Deadwood around mid-July of 1876, and Wild Bill did go and prospect in the creek beds a little bit, but he spent most of his time playing poker, gambling in the establishments in Deadwood. So he was here less than a month when on August the 1st he went into the number 10 saloon and gets involved in a poker game with Bill Sutherland, who was also called Jack McCall. Now he was successful in beating Jack McCall. The next day, around noon, Wild Bill returns to the number 10 saloon and sits down. Legend has it that Wild Bill always liked to sit with his back to the wall. Well, in the number 10 saloon, the front door would have been facing him, but the back door would have been behind him. He asked Charlie Rich if he would switch chairs with him, and Charlie Rich, who was one of the other gamblers, declined. So they were engaged in playing a hand of cards, and Jack McCall comes in through the back door, and Wild Bill doesn't notice him. At that time, Captain Massey had just beat Wild Bill's hand. Captain Massey had 4 sevens, and Wild Bill had a king full house. And Wild Bill asked Sam Young, the bartender, to get him $15 more of chips. And at that same time, Wild Bill said to Captain Massey, "You old duffer, you beat me on the hand." And then bang. Jack McCall shoots him in the back of the head, and Wild Bill drops dead.
So at the age of 39, the greatest icon of the Old West was dead. The greatest gunfighter, the one who killed more men than any other lawman. The loner. The kind and compassionate man of justice was dead. Wild Bill was the only lawman of the Old West who was not part of a law gang. Not so with Bat Masterson or Wyatt Earp and their brothers. The Masterson brothers, James, Ed, and of course William B., or Bat, or synonymous with law and order in Dodge City. After the Civil War, the Masterson family moved from the Union state of Illinois to a farmstead near Wichita, Kansas around 1867. 4 years later, Bat and his older brother Ed left for Dodge City. At that time, the city was primarily a buffalo hunting and military town. Almost immediately, Bat became one of those buffalo hunting sharpshooters dedicated to exterminating the food source of the Plains Indians. As a result, Masterson was engaged in one of the most famous battles of the Plains Indians War, Adobe Walls in the Panhandle of Texas. The battle pitted the legendary Comanche chief Quanah Parker against the buffalo hunters.
In 1874, as a very young man, he was part of the battle at Adobe Walls that 28 buffalo hunters held off supposedly anywhere from 500 to 1,500 Indians, that they had attacked the settlement. And of course they had their sharp buffalo guns, and they were able to pick the Indians off, shoot them at a long distance. He was a part of that, and that's where he kind of started earning the reputation, I think, that followed him from then on, as being somebody who was very cool, and in battle, he was able to hold his own.
After the fight, Bat Masterson became a scout for the United States Cavalry. During this time, the stunningly handsome Bat was flirting with a woman by the name of Molly Brennan. Her jealous boyfriend, Sergeant King, burst into the bar where Bat and Molly were talking, his 6 guns blazing. Both Molly and Bat were hit, but Bat was able to draw his gun and shoot King, the only man Bat was known to have killed. By 1877, Bat was back in Dodge City, where the Masterson law gang was taking shape. Jim Masterson, Bat's younger brother, and Wyatt Earp were deputies in Dodge City, which was part of Ford County. Bat himself was the county sheriff. As a lawman, Bat was known for his specially made Colt 45.
This gun is known as the Bat Masterson gun. It's 4 3/4 inch long. It was most of the Colt 45s were in a 5.5 and 7 inch barrel. This gun was ordered by Bat Masterson here in Dodge City. He wanted a shorter gun, just a little bit longer than the ejector rod, and easy on the trigger, just in case he did need to use it. But his most preferred method of dispensing justice was to get up in that man's face and draw that 6-shooter out and knock him upside the head with it. He didn't want to kill anybody because that was bad for Dodge City's reputation, and also Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, all these lawmen here, they could make an extra $2 to $2.50 for every arrest they made.
The last member of the Masterson law gang was the oldest of the Masterson brothers, Ed.
But his brother Ed Masterson was the actual marshal of Dodge City, which basically considered as chief of police at that time. And Ed Masterson was shot by a cowboy in 1878 and died.
For 2 more years, Bat remained sheriff of Ford County, meting out justice while rounding up many desperados without killing anyone. His impeccable reputation was all he needed.
He and Wyatt Earp both were very good shots, first of all, but they were very cool and they intimidated the cowboys. And in other words, they weren't afraid of them, and the cowboys gave them a lot of room.
When the cattle drive heyday of Dodge City ended, Wyatt Earp headed to Tombstone, where he formed his own infamous law gang. Jim Masterson drifted into Oklahoma Indian Territory and became a deputy U.S. Marshal, working for the famous hanging judge Isaac Parker. Bat moved on to briefly become sheriff in the cattle and mining towns of Colorado. When his gunslinging skills eroded, he moved to New York City and became a sports reporter and celebrity, dying at his desk at the age of 68 in 1921. Like fellow lawman Wyatt Earp, he had outlived the age of the gunslinger lawmen who ruled over the boom towns of the Wild West.